wind cut across the desert like a knife, dry and sharp, stirring up fine dust that shimmered under the pale moonlight. A single rider moved along the edge of Ghost Mesa, her figure hunched low over the saddle, every motion desperate. Her horse was near spent, nostrils flaring and foam crusting its chestnut coat. She didn't look back. She didn't dare. The silence behind her wasn't safety. It was a pause, a breath, before the next pursuit. Zeke Harper watched from the ridge above, seated on a flat stone with a battered canteen in one hand and a pipe in the other. He hadn't planned on company tonight. For near 10 years, he hadn't planned on much of anything at all. Life came in small doses now, sunrises, fence posts, the lowing of cattle, and the occasional prayer mumbled over a grave too old to weep at. But the sight of the lone rider, frantic under the stars, stirred something in him he'd thought long buried. The woman's horse staggered as it reached the foot of his land. She tried to push it harder, but the beast had no more to give. It collapsed with a grunt, sending her sprawling into the dirt. Zeke stood slowly, every joint in his frame protesting, and descended the rocky slope with the quiet grace of a man who had once known violence intimately. She scrambled to her feet, blood at her temple, eyes wild. "Don't come any closer," she shouted, though her voice cracked halfway through. Zeke halted, one hand raised, palm open. "Ain't comin' to harm you, miss." She looked ready to bolt, but her legs gave out. He moved then, quickly and without noise, catching her just before she hit the ground again. She was light but tense, like a coiled spring wrapped in tattered silk. He carried her to the cabin, a squat structure hidden between two leaning sycamores. The place smelled of dust and old leather, and she flinched when the door creaked open. He laid her gently on the cot, then poured water into a tin cup and held it to her lips. She drank greedily, then pulled back, eyes still wary. "You live here alone?" Zeke nodded. "Wasn't expecting guests." She sat up, wincing as she touched her forehead. "I'll leave as soon as I can walk." "Didn't say you had to." They sat in silence. A few embers glowed in the hearth from his earlier fire. Outside, the wind kept howling, and somewhere a barn owl called. After a time, she spoke again. "You got a name?" "Zeke." She looked at him, eyes narrowing like she was trying to remember something. "You don't look like a Zeke." He shrugged. "Ain't much left of him anyway." She didn't smile, but the corners of her mouth twitched. "Eliza." He nodded and tossed another log on the fire. "That yours?" he asked, gesturing to the small satchel still clutched in her hand. She held it closer, defensive. "Yes. What's in it that made you run your horse half to death?" Eliza stiffened. "Nothing that concerns you." Zeke met her gaze. She had the kind of look that didn't belong to anyone who'd lived an easy life. Eyes that had seen too much, mouth set like stone. But there was something else too, something burning beneath all that fear. He stood and poured himself a coffee, bitter and black. "Didn't mean offense. You can stay the night. No one'll find you out here." "That's what I'm afraid of," she muttered. Zeke said nothing. He knew better than to press a story before it was ready to be told. Later, as the fire dimmed and the cabin fell into quiet, she rose to stand by the window. Her silhouette in the moonlight was still and sharp, like a statue made of ash and sorrow. "You ever regret something so much, it becomes part of your bones?" she asked, not turning. Zeke watched her for a long moment before answering. "Every damn day." That night, she didn't sleep, and neither did he. She sat near the hearth, clutching her satchel like a lifeline, and he cleaned his rifle, more out of habit than expectation. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was thick with weight neither of them knew how to put down. At first light, Zeke stepped outside to fetch water. The wind had quieted, but a sound caught his ear, distant hooves, faint but steady. He walked up to the ridge and saw what he feared. 6 riders moving fast through the valley, dust rising in long trailing plumes behind them. He went back inside and shut the door. "You were followed." Eliza's eyes snapped to his. "How far?" "Half an hour, maybe less." She stood, face pale, fingers trembling on the strap of her satchel. "They'll kill me. And if you're helping me, they'll kill you too." Zeke checked his rifle, then walked over to a tall cupboard against the wall. He opened it to reveal a worn leather belt and six-shooter holster. Slowly, almost reverently, he buckled it around his waist. "I ain't much for dying in bed," he said. She stepped toward him. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me." He looked at her, eyes dark and steady. Sometimes it don't matter who a person is. Sometimes all that matters is what they're running from. She swallowed hard. "They'll be here soon." "I know." Zeke stepped onto the porch and looked out over the mesa, the rising sun painting the desert in gold and red. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the riders closed in, bringing with them a storm of lead and fire. He lit his pipe with slow, practiced fingers. Behind him, Eliza stood in the doorway, shoulders squared, the satchel still tight in her grasp. The desert held its breath. The sky turned amber as dawn broke over the mesa, casting long, blood-orange shadows across the desert floor. The air, though cool, buzzed with tension. Zeke Harper stood at the edge of his porch, steaming tin cup in hand, scanning the horizon like a man reading omens. His breath left in faint clouds. Behind him, the cabin door creaked open. Eliza stepped out cautiously, arms wrapped around herself, despite the warming sun. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes hollow but alert. She hadn't slept. Zeke didn't need to ask. He hadn't either. "They'll come," she said, voice low. "They always do." Zeke took a slow sip of coffee, then offered her the cup. She hesitated before accepting, fingers brushing his. Her hands were rougher than he'd expected, scarred, calloused. Hands that had worked hard and fought harder. "Don't suppose you'll tell me what's in that bag," he said, not unkindly. She clutched the satchel tighter. "Not yet. You're trusting me with your life, but not your secret." Her gaze didn't waver. "The secret is the reason they're coming." A heavy silence settled between them. From where they stood, the land looked quiet, cactus-lined ridges, scattered mesquite, the occasional hawk gliding overhead. But silence meant nothing out here. Trouble rode quiet and struck hard. Inside, Zeke opened an old crate beneath the hearth. Inside were boxes of ammunition, some worn but usable, and a double-barreled shotgun that still bore the initials M.H., his late wife's. He paused for just a second, thumb brushing over the engraving, before setting it beside the door. Eliza watched him from the corner of the room. "You were somebody once." He loaded shells into his belt. "Ain't we all once?" "No, I mean you moved like a soldier. Or a gunslinger." Zeke didn't respond. The past, when spoken aloud, carried too much weight. They spent the morning reinforcing the shack. Eliza helped without asking, nailing boards across the back window, stacking bags of dried beans and flour by the walls for makeshift cover. She moved with purpose, every step measured, not a stranger to danger, not even close. As the sun reached its peak, the ground began to tremble faintly. Zeke, crouched beside the window, leaned forward and peered through the dusty glass. "Riders," he said flatly. Eliza froze. "How many?" "5, maybe 6. Coming fast. From the south trail." She moved beside him, face pale but steady. Jedediah Thorne. He's the one chasing me." Zeke gave a slow nod. The name stirred faint memories, wanted posters, whispers in saloons, a man known for bloodshed and mockery, a killer's grin beneath a preacher's hat. Thorne ran a gang out of the canyon country. Scorched trails, broken towns, and folks too afraid to remember his face. "They won't ask questions," she said. "They won't knock." I gathered. The horses drew closer, hooves pounding like war drums. Zeke stepped out onto the porch again, shotgun resting on his shoulder. He didn't raise it, not yet. 6 men rode up in a cloud of grit and noise, dust swirling around them like a curse. At their head was Jed Thorne himself, tall and lean, all sharp edges and easy menace. His duster was stained with road and blood, and his smile spread wide beneath a brimmed black hat. "Harper," Jed called out, voice like velvet over rusted iron. "Been a long time." Zeke's jaw tightened. "Don't reckon I remember you." Jed laughed. "You weren't meant to. But I remember you." They used to tell stories about Black Zeke. Never thought I'd find him holed up with a woman who ain't his. Eliza stepped beside Zeke, chin high despite the tremble in her fingers. Jed's eyes flicked to her and narrowed. You made a fool of me, Eliza. Stole what was mine. And now this old ghost thinks he can keep you. She's not yours, Zeke said. And you're not talking her. Jed's smile faded. You sure you want to do this, old man? There's 6 of us. There's 1 of you. I count different, Zeke replied. I count wrongs. A tense pause. The sun beat down mercilessly, and sweat beaded beneath Zeke's collar. One of the riders shifted in his saddle, hand drifting toward his holster. Jed raised a hand. Not yet. We'll be back at sundown. You got till then to hand her over. Zeke didn't blink. You won't like what you find when the sun sets. Jed laughed again, hollow and cold. He turned his horse, and the gang rode off at a swirl of noise and sand, fading into the horizon like ghosts with teeth. When the sound of hooves was gone, Eliza sagged against the doorframe. You didn't have to do that, she said. Zeke shut the door and bolted it. I know. They'll kill you. They've killed better men. Maybe. But they ain't met me yet. Eliza looked at him. Truly looked. You really were Black Zeke, weren't you? He didn't answer. Just walked back to the table and checked his rounds. After a moment, she sat across from him, the satchel in her lap. I don't know why I ran here, she murmured. I just knew I had to run somewhere they wouldn't look. Somewhere forgotten. Zeke glanced up. Then you came to the right place. Outside, the desert stretched vast and silent again. But the quiet didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like a pause before thunder. Inside the cabin, 2 strangers sat across a worn wooden table, tied together by nothing but circumstance and the certainty of coming blood. The sun moved on, and the day grew hotter. By nightfall, everything would change. The cabin felt smaller as the afternoon wore on, as though the walls themselves were bracing for the storm to come. Shadows stretched long across the floor, reaching like fingers toward the rifle leaning against the table. Outside, the wind had died, and the world held its breath. Zeke sat in his old chair, methodically sharpening a blade that hadn't seen use in years. The sound of stone against steel was steady, soothing even, but his eyes held the storm. Eliza sat on the edge of the cot, arms crossed over her chest, the satchel still nestled close like a wounded child. She watched him. Why'd you stop? He looked up, puzzled. Stop what? Whatever you were before. Black Zeke. He considered the question, then set the knife down and leaned back. Because vengeance don't heal nothing. Just hollows you out slow. You didn't look hollow when you faced Jed. Zeke allowed himself a tight smile. Even an old wolf remembers how to bare its teeth. Eliza's eyes dropped to the floor. He wasn't always like this. Jed. Zeke raised a brow. He was a bounty hunter when I met him. Chased the worst kind of men, and folks called him a hero. I was running saloons back then, Cardin's Ridge, Silver Elk. We crossed paths more times than I can count. He had charm, clever words. I fell for all of it. Zeke said nothing, just listened. It was easier for some stories to spill out when no one tried to catch them. But there was something wrong under the surface. She went on. Jed liked control, and when the bounties ran dry, he found another way to feel powerful. Formed his gang, started bleeding towns dry. First with threats, then with bullets. And you stayed? Zeke asked without judgment. I left, she said quietly, but not before I took something. She opened the satchel at last. Inside lay a thick bundle wrapped in oilskin. She unrolled it with care. Documents, contracts, bank notes, ledgers. Zeke leaned forward. Proof, she said, of every bribe, every illegal claim, every town he extorted. He made a deal with a railroad outfit. Promised security for a cut of the land they stole. This is what he kills to keep buried. Zeke picked up one page, scanning it with narrowed eyes. You mean to expose him? I mean to ruin him. I've been running town to town, looking for someone who still remembers how to stand for something. Zeke returned the papers gently. That's a rare find these days. You're the first who didn't flinch. Maybe that's 'cause I've got nothing left to lose. She looked at him for a long time, something like sorrow flickering behind her guarded expression. That your wife's shotgun? He nodded once. What happened? Zeke's voice turned low. We had a ranch, a little one. No cattle, just goats and grain. A boy too. Caleb. Quiet, thoughtful. We stayed clear of the world. What changed? The world didn't stay clear of us. He stood then, walked to the window as if the past might be visible in the dust outside. Outlaws came riding through, said they needed food, shelter. I said no. They laughed. Then they shot my wife while she was hanging wash and took Caleb with them to make sure I didn't follow. Eliza's breath caught. You never found him. Zeke shook his head. But I found the men. One by one. For 2 years, I tracked him down. Didn't matter how far they ran. Black Zeke was the name they gave me. Papers wrote stories. Called me righteous. Called me ruthless. She said nothing. I killed the last one in a canyon out past Salt Fork. Then I came back here. Never took another step past the mesa. Eliza closed the satchel quietly. I'm sorry. Zeke turned, his face unreadable. Don't be. You asked why I stopped. That's why. Revenge fills a man up with fire, but it don't warm him. Just burns everything close to him. A hawk screeched outside, circling above the ridge. Zeke watched it for a moment, then walked to the shelf and pulled down a dusty map. You said these documents could ruin Jed, he said. They can. You got someone to take them to? There's a man in Yuma. Ex-lawman turned newspaper editor. Ezekiel Grant. He'll print what no one else will. Zeke traced a route on the map with a calloused finger. Then you ride south through Diablo Pass. Avoid the trail. It'll take 2 days, maybe 3. Her face tightened. What about Jed? Zeke's eyes didn't leave the map. I'll keep him busy. She stood. You can't take them all on your own. I won't have to. Eliza frowned. I don't understand. Zeke rolled the map and tucked it under his arm. They think this cabin is all there is. But there's more to these hills than brush and bones. I know every rock, every blind turn. This land don't belong to them. He looked at her then, not as a stranger, but as a comrade. They'll ride into a fight, he said, but not the one they're expecting. Eliza stepped closer. You'd risk your life for me? Zeke's voice was quiet. I'm not doing it for you. A long beat passed between them, filled with the weight of things unspoken. I'm doing it because somewhere out there, a man like Jed is going to keep killing unless someone says enough. The wind stirred again, faint but rising. Evening shadows began to bleed across the floor. In the distance, the faint sound of hooves returned, this time closer. Eliza looked toward the sound. They're early. Zeke nodded, calm as stone. Then let's be ready. The sun dipped low, casting deep crimson light across the land, as if the heavens themselves sensed what was coming. The mesa beyond the cabin turned to flame and shadow. Ghost Mesa, they used to call it, though few remembered why. Most folks didn't live long enough to ask. Zeke Harper stood beneath its looming edge, shotgun slung low, eyes narrowed to the trail where dust had begun to rise again. He'd sent Eliza off just before the horizon swallowed the last of the sun, down through the canyon trail, known only to those who'd lived long with the land. She hadn't wanted to go. Her hands had trembled when she mounted his mule, her eyes flashing with something between fury and gratitude. I'll make it, she'd said. You better, Zeke had replied. Ain't got enough fight in me to do this again. Now he stood alone, just him and the dying day. The cabin sat behind him like a worn-out sentinel, small, squat, and made of the kind of timber that whispered when the wind blew right. Inside, traps had been set, doors rigged to collapse, flour dust sprinkled to betray footsteps, mirrors hung behind curtains to catch a glint of movement. The cabin wasn't a home anymore. It was bait. The riders came into view at last, 7 this time, not 6. 1 extra. Jed must have picked up another gun hand. Zeke counted them calmly, noting their positions, the way they rode, relaxed but ready, like men used to ending things fast. Jedediah Thorne rode at the center, same as before. His coat flapped like wings, and his wide-brimmed had cast his face in shadow. But Zeke knew that face now, knew the lines, the grin that never reached the eyes, the mouth that spoke God's words with a killer's intent. They halted about 30 yards out, horses stamping, snorting. Jed called out. "Evening, Harper. Thought we said sundown." "You're late," Zeke said. That drew a few chuckles. Jed dismounted slowly, glancing around with a predator's ease. "She ain't here." "That right. She ain't your concern." "Now that's a shame. See, you might have had a bargain while she was still in your care. But if she ran, well, now I got no reason to leave you alive." Zeke stepped forward, just one pace. "You always need 7 men to take one old man." Jed's grin widened. "You ain't just any old man. You're the last breath of a dying myth, and I aim to snuff it out." Zeke didn't move. "Then come do it." The first gun barked before the last syllable left his lips. Zeke dropped flat, a shot tearing through the space where his chest had been. He rolled behind a boulder, returning fire in a sharp, clean burst, 2 blasts from the shotgun, both aimed low. One horse screamed and reared. A rider fell, cursing, pinned beneath the animal's bulk. The rest scattered, some toward the cabin, others fanning out across the mesa's edge. Zeke moved fast, ducking from stone to stone. He'd spent 20 years studying this ground, its folds, its blind corners, the way sound bounced off stone. The mesa wasn't just his home. It was his partner in this fight. From behind a thorn bush, he spotted a shadow slipping toward the back of the cabin. "Quiet, quick." Zeke raised his pistol and fired. The shadow jerked sideways, stumbled, then vanished from view. No cry. Maybe dead, maybe not. 2 more came at the front, guns blazing. They riddled the cabin walls, unaware that the figure they thought crouched inside had long since vanished into the rocks. The door burst open in a puff of dust. No man behind it, just a rope tied to the trigger. One of the men stepped through and tripped the next line. A crate fell from the rafters, iron tools and stones crashing down. The man went down screaming. Zeke used the noise. He circled wide, coming up behind another rider, now crouched beside a mesquite. He moved quiet, too quiet for a man his age, and when the gunman turned, Zeke had already fired. For left. Jed watched from the rise, his expression darkening. He drew 2 pistols and walked forward, slow and sure. Zeke saw him come and waited. Jed fired once. Zeke ducked. Fired again. Splinters flew from a log near his shoulder. Zeke rolled left, raised his own pistol, and clipped Jed's arm. Blood bloomed on the coat, but Jed barely flinched. "You think this ends with you winning?" Jed called, voice still cool. "I've buried better men than you. And I've killed worse than you just to start my day." Zeke growled. Jed motioned. Another gunman advanced, tall, young, reckless. Zeke let his shot, just as the man stepped from cover. 1 bullet. 1 scream. 3 left. Then it happened. The wind shifted, just enough to carry a faint sound, hoofbeats. Fast. Coming from the south. Zeke stiffened. Jed heard it too. He turned slightly, frowning. From the canyon trail, 2 riders emerged, small figures on lean horses, moving fast. Dust trailed behind them like war smoke. Eliza was one. The other, a stranger. Zeke blinked. Then he saw the rifle slung over the stranger's back, the U.S. Marshal star on his vest. Grant, the newspaperman, wasn't just a rider. He was the law once, and he'd brought help. Jed swore. "You tricked me." "No," Zeke said. "You just never saw past yourself." Eliza rode hard, skidding to a stop behind the cabin, leaping down with practiced ease. She drew her pistol without hesitation. "You didn't think I'd leave you to die, did you?" Zeke grinned, blood on his lip. "Took you long enough." Grant swung down beside her. "Marshal Ezekiel Grant," he barked, raising his rifle. "Jedediah Thorne, you're under arrest for murder, extortion, conspiracy, and about 12 other things I'll read off proper once you're in chains." Jed sneered. "I'm not going anywhere." Grant didn't argue. He fired. The shot hit one of the remaining riders in the leg. Another panicked and rode off. One stayed behind, frozen. Jed roared, turned his pistol on Grant, only to take a shot in the shoulder from Eliza, sharp and clean. He fell to his knees, weapon slipping from his fingers. Zeke stepped forward, battered but steady. "I should kill you," he said. Jed coughed, blood flecking his lips. "Then do it." Zeke stared down at him. No. Men like you don't deserve a legend. You deserve to be forgotten. Grant cuffed him. He'll face trial. We've got the proof now, thanks to her. Eliza exhaled hard, shoulders shaking. Zeke turned to her. You all right? No, she said. But I will be. The night fell silent. No more shots. Just the sound of the wind reclaiming the mesa. The cabin stood, battered but unburned. A scarred place in a scarred land. Zeke looked at it one last time. I think I'm done with this place. Eliza nodded. Then let's leave it behind. And just like that, the legend of Ghost Mesa faded into twilight. Only the wind remembered. They rode away from Ghost Mesa as the stars blinked into view, slow and quiet. The dust of the skirmish still clung to their boots and clothes, but no one spoke of it. There were some silences that honored the dead, and others that weighed like oaths. This was both. Eliza rode at Zeke's side, her back straight despite exhaustion. Her eyes scanned the road ahead, but her thoughts lingered behind them, in the cabin, in the rifle smoke, in the look Jed had given her before he fell. Zeke didn't ask what she was thinking. Some wounds didn't bleed, but they throbbed just the same. Grant took the lead, the marshal's badge still pinned to his vest, though it caught little light now. He had bound Jed's wound and chained him to the packhorse, where the outlaw swayed like a broken scarecrow. His hat had fallen back at the ridge. No one had bothered to retrieve it. You must 3 days if the weather holds, Grant said over his shoulder. We ride fast, we make it in 2. Zeke grunted in reply. His ribs ached, and the graze across his hips still oozed under his coat, but he didn't slow. Pain had never stopped him before, and it wouldn't start now. They made camp by a dry creek the first night. Coyotes howled in the far distance, but none came near. Maybe the scent of gunpowder still hung on their skin. Maybe even predators knew to keep their distance from legends in the making. Eliza sat across from Zeke, legs crossed, her face lit by firelight. She'd barely eaten, just held a tin cup and stared into the flames. You never told me how long you'd been watching that place, she said softly. Zeke looked up. The cabin. No. The mesa. The world. He poked the fire with a stick, long enough to see it rot. She smiled faintly. You're more poet than outlaw. Funny. I thought they were the same thing. Jed stirred then, muttering in his sleep. A curse, maybe. Or a name. Zeke didn't look over. Eliza did. You think they'll hang him? Depends on the jury, Grant said without looking up from where he cleaned his rifle. But if they read every page of that satchel, he won't see another sunrise outside a noose. Zeke nodded slowly. He'll get his judgment, but it won't be from me. Eliza met his eyes. That's not who you are anymore. I'm not sure who I am, he said, but I know who I was. That man's buried somewhere out in the hills with the rest of the past. She looked at the horizon. Maybe the past doesn't stay buried. No, Zeke agreed, but you can build something over it. The fire crackled between them. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Morning came cold, crisp, with frost on the saddles. They rode in silence again, the desert shifting from steel gray to gold as the sun lifted. The second day passed faster. The land began to change. More brush, more signs of roads. Distant smoke from ranches and settlements. Civilization creeping back in. By the time they reached Yuma's edge, Zeke felt like the dust had sunk into his bones. Still, he straightened when they passed the first rider on the trail. A man tipped his hat in respect, not out of fear, but recognition. Word traveled fast out here. Grant peeled off toward the sheriff's office with Jed in tow, while Zeke and Eliza made for the town square. It wasn't much to look at. Wooden storefronts, dusty windows, a saloon with swinging doors, and a small paper office with Yuma Weekly Ledger painted in faded gold on the glass. Inside, the man behind the desk looked up in surprise as Eliza set the satchel on his counter. Miss Harrow, he said, blinking. Back from the grave, are we? Back from worse, she replied. Zeke stood behind her, arms crossed. Everything in there is ready for print, she continued. Names, locations, documents. The people deserve to know what men like Jed Thorne really are. The man opened the satchel, whistling low. This'll shake the territory clean. You sure about this? She didn't hesitate. I'm sure. He nodded. Then I'll have a copy running by tomorrow morning. Zeke stepped outside before the conversation could continue. The sky overhead was sharp blue, cloudless and wide. A hawk wheeled in the distance. Eliza joined him a few minutes later, her face calm but resolute. It's done, she said. He nodded. Good. They stood in silence for a long while, watching the people pass. A boy ran by with a stick, pretending it was a rifle. A woman in a bonnet swept her steps. A young deputy eyed Zeke with a blend of awe and suspicion. I suppose this is where we part ways, Eliza said. Zeke didn't answer immediately. He turned to look at her fully. You got plans? I might stay a while, she said. The paper needs someone to handle the ledgers, and I've had enough running. He nodded. Running doesn't suit you. Neither does hiding. A silence stretched between them, one filled with choices not yet made. Finally, she spoke. You could stay too. Zeke looked past her, out toward the west, where the land flattened into shimmering plains and mountains rolled like distant smoke. I could, he said, but there's other ghosts I still need to bury. She didn't argue, just smiled soft and sad. Will I see you again? He tipped his hat. If the wind's right. She stepped forward, kissed his cheek, gentle, grateful. He walked away without looking back. Some things were easier that way. Days passed. Jed Thorne stood trial. The courtroom overflowed with witnesses and papered walls. Grant testified. Eliza's documents sealed the verdict. Jed died with no last words worth printing. Zeke Harper didn't attend. By the time the verdict rang out, he was far from Yuma, somewhere beyond the ridgeline, his shadow long on the dust. But stories moved faster than horses, and the legend of Black Zeke was not so easily buried. Children told tales of the outlaw who turned against his kind, of a widow who brought down a gang with truth and grit, of a firelit cabin where the line between justice and vengeance burned bright. In some towns, they said he was dead. In others, they claimed he'd gone east or south or into Mexico. A few swore he'd settled on a nameless ranch, raising goats again. Maybe a dog. Maybe peace. No one could say for sure. But whenever justice felt far, and the wicked walked too bold, folks would pause at the sound of a boot step in the dust. Because legends never die. They ride on the wind,